Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Eli Alshanetsky. He is assistant professor in philosophy at Temple University. Dr. Alshanetsky's research and teaching interests are at the intersection of philosophy of mind and language, epistemology, and cognitive science. He is the author of the book we're going to focus mostly on today, Articulating a Thought. So, Dr. Alshanetsky, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me, Ricardo.
So, let's start with talking a little bit about self knowledge. What is it?
Right. Well, the term self-knowledge is a little misleading because it suggests knowledge of something called the self, maybe
Yeah.
like an enduring, substantial self, but really is something a little more minimal. It's just knowledge of our various attributes or characteristics. So, we have physical attributes like height, weight, hair, eye color, things like that. But also, we have mental attributes. So various mental states like beliefs, desires, hopes, wishes, passing thoughts, sensations, different things going on in our minds. And self-knowledge is knowledge of all of that, all these different attributes. So the focus is obviously has been on the mental attributes usually.
And how do we obtain self knowledge?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, I think it's not like there's a single route to self-knowledge. Some people uh, do argue that, but I think in some cases we come to know our own states in much of the same way that we come to know other people's mental states. We have character, personality traits, and those seem to be like this. So if I tell you, "Oh, I'm a hard worker, I'm courageous," right? It's not like I have some kind of special insight uh, that's unavailable to others. I look at my own behavior and how I acted and things like that. Maybe implicit biases are like that. I need to take an implicit association test. But in other cases, it does seem like we have a special way of knowing our mental states. And Descartes famously was very impressed by this. In the case of thoughts, my knowledge that some thinking is going on or that I'm thinking and what I'm thinking about, though the sphere of this kind of knowledge is broader than just thoughts. I think it encompasses, sensations, perceptions, feelings, anything that's essentially experiential. Descartes thought, this knowledge of thoughts is, certain and indubitable. But since Descartes, of course, many philosophers have disputed that we can have certainty. But I think it's still widely agreed that, by no means undisputed, that we have special first-person way of knowing our own mental states. It's not available to anyone else, and that this way of knowing, this route to self-knowledge, delivers high degree of justification. It's interesting to investigate what that itself consistent, like what that involves.
Uh, what are the main approaches to self knowledge in philosophy then? And I mean, do you think that there's one of them that is better than the others? And what are their limitations?
Yeah, this is a giant question. I can't possibly cover all the approaches and all the limitations, but let me say some things.
Okay.
So the main approaches they
Mhm.
include, you have the perceptual model where a way of coming to know our mental states is a kind of either inner sense, or we have a direct acquaintance with our mental states, but it's a kind of perception. uh, though inner perception, not outer perception of the world. There's the interpretive model where we come to know our mental states through inference or self-interpretation, whether this inference is a conscious or unconscious inference. There's this idea, the constitution model, that somehow it's not that we have this mental state that's already in place and we come to know it, but rather somehow in the process of coming to know it, we bring the mental state into being. Um, it's another approach, and there's the expressivist model that ties self-knowledge with expression in various ways. So I guess these are some of the main models. I mean, as far as limitations go, this is a huge debate. So some models naturally fit some mental states better than others. For example, the perceptual model may fit sensations well. Like, if I have a pain or an itch, maybe I just observe my own pain or itch. But I think it's less plausible when it comes to beliefs. It's not like, to come to know what I believe, hold on, I'm just going to scan my beliefs as items of consciousness. And there's this transparency idea due to Gareth Evans originally and others that we don't really scan or perceive or sense our own beliefs. Rather, we, in asking myself whether I believe that P, I put into operations the same procedures maybe, right? Or I try to answer the world-directed question of whether P is the case, whether there will be a third world war. So the idea is that we look out into the world rather than inside ourselves. And there's something importantly right about this idea. So maybe some models are better fit some mental states, but not others. And I think within the philosophy of self-knowledge, philosophers have tried to extend one or the other of these models across the board. So, for example, showing how something like this transparency observation, that I come to know my mental state by looking outward, also maybe applies to sensations, right? Somehow. But that seems initially at least like a stretch, and it takes some ingenuity to develop such an idea. But this is not really my project. So I'm not looking for like a single approach to self-knowledge that would encompass all the mental states. So maybe the best way to go here is just by focusing on the kind of cases that initially gripped me, where we actually get clear on what we're thinking in the process of putting our thoughts into words, and saying, maybe I can say a little bit why I'm dissatisfied by the existing theories just when it comes to these phenomena that I'm interested in. So,
Okay.
like just to give you examples of the kind of cases that I'm interested in is, you listen to someone speaking, like, I'm speaking right now, and then you may have this objection or something wrong that oh my God, I think that's wrong. But it may initially be unclear to you what it is that you're disagreeing with. And it may take you some time and effort to say, well, there's a kind of, there's a problem here. It's a shift. I don't know. What is it? Is this like, maybe equivocation or this or the other? And then you find a formulation that expresses what you have in mind. And maybe it's not a genuine problem with what I'm saying, but at the very least, you've gotten clear on what you were thinking, right? And in my book, I focused, I think maybe wasn't the best thing to do, but I focused on theoretical cases, like, when you have thoughts about philosophy. But this occurs all the time. You can have this insight about a friend's behavior that you're interacting with, or watching some movie, like, you'd be like, why is this, why is he showing me this? And then suddenly you realize, oh, wow, something clicks, and you appreciate the movie more now, but not in a brute way, not just, that you appreciate it more. There's something about it. And putting it into words can help you get clear on what it is. So I'm interested in these kinds of cases where the result is a kind of self-knowledge. And so how do we arrive at this knowledge, right? What is the basis of it? And here you look at these models that I just mentioned. So take the perceptual model. I mean, it doesn't seem to apply to these cases that I'm interested in, because it lacks this activity of trying to put or express your mental state and thereby coming to know it. There is not much. I mean, I guess there's direction of attention, but there's not much of an active process of the same kind. The interpretive model that tries to assimilate self-knowledge to interpretation doesn't seem perfectly appropriate here either, because interpretation is one thing and expression or articulation is another thing, and you can interpret yourself without having to put your thoughts into words, right? You can just silently go over the evidence and then make a certain silent conclusion, and in any case, this process of a very different kind of structure. And the constitution model doesn't seem applicable either, because here, I'm struck by something, and I'm trying to put this into words. The reason why I'm trying to put this into words in the first place is that it causes various reactions in me already. So it's not like I'm trying to bring a state into being. There is already something on my mind that I'm trying to express and come to know, and that's my target. Also, I think oftentimes our thoughts are not very good. So once we put them into words, we immediately can tell that they're kind of embarrassing and wrong. and it's very helpful actually to find our mistakes. And it's not clear why that would happen if you're just bringing the thought into being rather than trying to get clear on your existing thoughts. So I guess the expressivist expression model comes maybe closer to explaining the cases that I have in mind, but we really need to understand our own role in the process of expression. And there's many cases where we just stumble kind of serendipitously on the formulations of our thoughts. So in a novel or a book or internet discussion forum or something like that. And here what's doing the work is not expression per se, or definitely not your own expression, but a kind of recognition. There's a presentation of what you're thinking, maybe in a clear way, and that fits better the perception model. So there's a kind of combination, the perception model and the expression, a kind of hybrid. So in any case, the point is that it seems like with the cases that I'm interested in, each of the models doesn't exactly fit, right? But maybe some combination can still be useful, right? But you need to develop a new model that fits these cases. Sorry, this was a long-winded way of answering it, but
No, yeah, but my question was very broad, so that's fair enough. So, getting into the core topic of your book, what is articulation then?
So by articulation, I don't mean anything technical or sophisticated. I just mean the process of expressing a thought. So either outwardly by speaking or writing or in your own mind. I guess the only caveat here is that the way I'm thinking of it, to articulate a thought, you don't have to like pronounce each of the words like slowly to yourself. Sometimes you can just project ahead and have the whole formulation in mind. And what's crucial here is that you come to know what the words are, and that counts as articulation also. And also sometimes other people can articulate your thoughts for you. That to me is also a kind of articulation, or by reading a book, you can recognize that something fits what you're thinking. And there's different standards of articulation, and here I'm really interested in this modest standard where you express yourself in literal language in a way that would be comprehensible to other speakers of the language. And this kind of standard is sometimes invoked when students sometimes here are told to express themselves clearly using plain and simple words. And it's not just that we're trying to get the students to be comprehensible to other people, which is of course also true, but the deeper thing that's going on here is that we think that obscure expression also alienates people from their own thoughts and acts like a kind of smokescreen maybe. And so there's something of personal value to be able to articulate your thoughts in this way.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any idea if when trying to articulate thoughts, they are already there somewhere, basically to be found, or that we basically create them in the process of articulation?
Yeah. So I think that we do both. Sometimes we just start talking, without anything too specific in mind, and the thought just emerges, materializes out of the process of speaking. Other times we start with something highly determinate that we want to say, and I think there's a whole spectrum of cases in between, right? When we have some kind of partial idea, and the idea becomes more specific when we go along. To me, it's interesting. The spectrum is not actually unique to like linguistic expression, but it spans a bunch of other creative pursuits. So you have it like in painting, for example. You have painters like Jackson Pollock or Gerhard Richter, and they try to minimize. The whole point is to minimize conscious control and just let the process take hold and lead them somewhere. So they allow the medium to dictate where they end up. But on the other side, interestingly, to me at least, there's those who subordinate even like the smallest details of their work to the initial vision that they had. So Stephen King has this amazing essay on writing, and here he compared the process of writing a novel to the excavation of a fossil, right? That was already there when the writing begun. And David Lynch has a book called Catching the Big Fish, where he describes getting his ideas for movies in the same terms. And my main interest has been in cases like this, where we do start with something highly determinate. And in those cases, articulation the way I see it is an instrument of reflection. It's a way of excavating, as Stephen King may say, a way of reaching within ourselves for ideas.
Is the articulation process based on reasons?
So being based on reasons a little bit, it can mean different things. So
Okay.
definitely articulation can be hard. It requires thinking, it requires cognitive work, and in a very, very broad sense of reasons, sure, it's a rational process. But in a slightly narrower sense of reasons, uh, where reasons are considerations, right, to which the subject has access or can consult, or explicit. In that sense of reason, I want to say no, it's not based on reasons. Here, one way of looking at the process is of me choosing my words in order to achieve a certain effect, to express a certain thought. But this doesn't work in the cases that I'm interested in, because here we get clear on the thought in the process of putting it into words. So we don't have this access to the thought beforehand. It can't serve as a reason for selection. So we need something else. And in fact, this activity kind of resists being, I mean, it seems like something we engage in, something that we do, but we can't really understand it as us consulting some reasons. So it's puzzling in a way. How do we manage to select words? What is the nature of this thinking that's required to select the words to express our thoughts if we lack access to the thought that we want to express? And I think it's not the only activity like this. There's others. So Rosalind Hursthouse had this essay on irrational actions, where she talks about various kinds of emotional expression. So if somebody smashes a vase, right, to express their anger, it's not like they think, oh, how should I best express my mental state? And then deliberating and be like, well, the best means to do it is to smash a vase, right? That's not how this works. There's just a spontaneous expression that's going on, but also it doesn't mean that that's unmodulated or there's no selectivity. Just that the selectivity is not based on reasons or explicit considerations. That there's no means ends reasoning or anything like this. And now, I do think that sometimes alongside, I mean, this is a complication when we do articulate our thoughts. We do sometimes engage in reasoning kind of alongside of the process. But my main point is that it's just this kind of reasoning plays an ancillary role, right? It's not the main thing that we do, and it's possible to do everything and succeed without it. So we can, I mean, in cases where we recognize our thoughts in novels or in the internet without any reasoning, we don't really have to do much except just like recognize that something matches our thoughts.
So in the book, when it comes to articulation, at a certain point you talk about the implicit / explicit strategy. Could you tell us about that?
Right. Well, the idea there is that when it's true that we don't start with fully explicit knowledge of what we had in mind, but it's also the case that we don't start from a cognitive blank. We have some knowledge. I call it explicit knowledge. It's more akin to like firsthand familiarity with the thought. It's experientially based. So I mean, we may have some explicit conception of the thought too, but again, it's not that's not the important thing. So somehow, when we first have the thought, there's something that comes to mind. It's a certain kind of experience, and we're guided by that experience in trying to find like the right words for it. So what guides us is not some explicit consideration, but it's just a stored. I mean, I call it the trace or the signature of the thought, which is just like the experience that we have while when it first occurred. And in being guided by it, we also, there's a better presentation. So we're actually presented what we're thinking better too. But the idea is that what underwrites our recognition or selection of words is not explicit knowledge, but it's this kind of implicit familiarity.
Do you have any idea why is it that sometimes it seems easy for us to articulate complex thoughts, but other times it seems really hard to articulate even simple thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. I mean, the first thing, do we really understand? So what is it for a thought to be simple or to be complex? I mean, one natural idea of complexity could be like syntactic, grammatical complexity, but maybe that's not the only one. But let's go with that. I do think, I mean, there's an intuitive sense in which there's some thoughts are simple and some complex, and just their structure. But so let's divide this question. So why articulating complex thoughts can be easy?
Hmm.
Uh, Here, I think the answer is largely practice. So, when I was an undergraduate studying philosophy, I would have all kinds of thoughts, and I would struggle to just like to put them into words. And oftentimes I would fail, and sometimes I would succeed and realize that they were silly, or they're some were better than others. But part of like learning philosophy was to gain all kinds of skills, right? Where I can recognize some modes of expression as obscure or misleading or unhelpful. I'm more familiar with a theoretical terrain that may allow me to dismiss some positions it's inapplicable, right? Immediately. I would not be able to do this as an undergraduate, but after learning for a while now, there's a whole spectrum. There's a whole domain of thoughts that would have totally baffled me then. That now I'll be like, oh yeah, I know what it is, and I could put it. I express it pretty easily. I think some of these thoughts, they definitely seem complex then. I mean, so maybe those are uh, and I'm gonna say that there's I feel now that there's still whole domains where I'm totally inarticulate, and I confess that I've never been really good at putting my thoughts into words. I don't, which is maybe why I'm led to think a lot about this issue. Like, but maybe politics for me is like that. I may have, you know, people are talking at a dinner party or something, and I may have this visceral sense of injustice, right? And I'd be like, but then when I try to express myself, I'm going to choke or rant, and I just don't usually talk about these. I don't have that much practice systematically expressing myself in these areas, and so complex thoughts in that domain would still baffle me, and there's many others like that too. So okay, that's about complex thoughts and why they can be easy to articulate sometimes. I think that's the easy part. Why simple thoughts can be hard? I think that's really an amazing question, right? Um, so I'm still thinking about the reason for this, but this is where I'm coming from. So I think there are generic events, generic happenings, uh, and they can perfectly fit some type, and we can package them sort of in generic language. Um, but sometimes we notice things that are individual to us. They come from us, from our own engagement in a domain that reflect our individual experience and perspective. So really, so why you asked why complex thoughts can be easy to articulate, and the answer was practice. Why are the simple thoughts can sometimes be hard? Well, I think it has to do with the origin of their thoughts, of these thoughts, how they come about. Um, and it's not that these thoughts are particularly complex. It could be just one quality, one attribute that you kind of like think about, that you have in mind, uh, and it's just that through your own engagement with the domain, you acquire your own way of carving it out, your own category. Uh, it's like, what is this quality of my friend that I'm thinking about, right? Trying to write that, and then you say, well, he's great, he's nice, he's a cool person. Uh, but really, is that all there is? No, sometimes there's something more specific. Maybe you have something more specific in mind, or the same with reactions to the work of art. You sometimes you can engage with the work of art. You see it, and you have this really, you have this reaction, like a very visceral reaction, and you're like, wow, it has this profound effect on you. And you come out of the museum, and it was like, well, what was it? What is it that you realized about it? And you're like, oh, it was really cool. I mean, really, is that all? Right? Maybe there's something else. Um, but what is it? What is it that you realize? And here, it's not that you need more complex grammar or fancy words. It's just that there's some patterns of expression, right? That you're stuck with, and they fit certain modes of thought. Uh, but others, these categories that come from our own experience, right? They don't come packaged in this way. So, and those may actually be shared. So as soon as you find the right words, others may recognize immediately that they've thought this too, right? It's a kind of breakthrough in self-knowledge, right? We can breathe freer. I think this can happen in personal and societal scale too. So I'm not sure how well this answers your question, but this is the direction. It's just that given the origin and format of some thoughts, they resist some conventional modes of expression.
Mhm. So just a sort of follow-up to that, do you think that the difficulty in articulating a particular thought has anything to do with what we're going to do with it? Like, for example, if we're going to share it with other people, use it to convince someone of something, or just keep it to ourselves, for example?
Well, I think that there is an additional difficulty, right, that comes
Okay.
from, once you've expressed the thought, you're like, oh my God, how do I make it plausible and convincing to other people? How can I put it in a way that would be more relatable to others? That's hard. But I think that the initial difficulty that we have is just to make the thought comprehensible to us, right? That's a personal difficulty that we have. And of course, once we do it, we end up, expressing it in a way that will be comprehensible to others. But that's not like the main goal of the process, right? It's not like there's a reason that, oh, I want to be able to convince someone else, or I want to make it comprehensible to this particular person. It's just that us trying to get clear on it ourselves. So that initial difficulty, I don't think that it depends on these additional purposes.
And do you think that it has anything to do with the limitations of language, that sometimes it's just hard to articulate a particular thought, being it hard or easy just because language has limitations?
Well, I mean, certainly it has to do with the limitations of language in some contexts and some
Mm.
periods. So in 1984, for example, Orwell had had some examples, right, of language being structured in such a way that it makes some politically deviant thoughts really hard to express,
Yeah.
uh, really hard to articulate. So yeah, if the accepted language only allows you to say good or not so good, there'll be many thoughts that would be hard to put into words. And that happens, I think, with time. There's different thoughts can be harder to articulate in different historical periods, given the available concepts. Uh, and there's whole interesting work by Miranda Fricker and other philosophers who talk about hermeneutic injustice, where somehow the whole conceptual system is systematically skewed in a certain way, and so somebody may recognize some form of like a pattern of treatment that's really unjust, but have a difficulty expressing it because the language and just more generally the conceptual system lacks the tools to put it into words for very systematic reasons. So that all happens, but I take it that what you're really asking is about like inherent limitations. I mean, besides, are there any inherent limitations of moving between, thought and language, such
Mhm.
that makes some thoughts difficult to articulate or impossible? So here, I'm not totally sure. There's definitely, the transition from perception to thought, I think, is like that. So, when I look at a color, I can tell you, oh, it's red or it's white or what, but what I'm seeing is so specific and rich that language never actually can catch up, right, to this kind of specificity. So there's always something there. But in the case of the thoughts that interest me, that's usually, I mean, we do say words fail me or it
Mhm.
defies description. And I'm open to there being something like this with some modes of thought. So maybe mathematical thoughts and geometric fields could be like this. It's interesting to investigate. Uh, but also I think it would be interesting if there, in the case of thought, there were no inherent limitations. That in some cases it could be hard to express a thought, but somehow there's this fit between language and thought. That would be a really interesting uh, result, and we should, I mean, if that's the case, we should really ask why there is this fit, right? Why that seems something like that would cry out for explanation.
Okay, so one last question slash topic. Having difficulty articulating a thought, I mean, does it mean that it is not clear in our minds or not?
Good. In some cases, I think that the difficulty shouldn't suggest to us unclarity at all. So Henrik von Kleist, the poet, had this essay about the gradual formation of thoughts in the process of speech, and it was really a critique of public examinations where somebody's put in a room and they're told, okay, tell us what you know about this topic. He was arguing against it because he thought that the difficulty of conveying your knowledge a lot of the times comes from just like a shift in context. So in certain contexts, you can easily relate a lot of your thoughts, but then once you move to a different context, suddenly it'd be really hard for you to express yourself. So right now we're talking about, like philosophy, but let's say we're climbing, we're doing mountain climbing, and somebody confronts me with a question. It's like, hey, what do you think about, what did you argue on page this of your book? I'll be like stumped. I would have difficulty finding my bearings. So in this case, I think it's just a contingent limitation, right? How fluently and smoothly we express ourselves has to do with context and shouldn't always suggest that we have the thought unclearly in our minds. In fact, some of the clearest thoughts could be very difficult to express in some situations. I mean, but sometimes I think that the difficulty is a symptom of deeper unclarity. So one kind of unclarity has to do with lack of vividness, and this is connected to the transparency of language, our ability to be able to tell when thoughts are the same or different. I think transparency of language is important in like political communication and just in general. There's a I think that this quality is interesting to investigate. But another kind of unclarity has to do with poor integration. So you can have a thought, something very vivid, something vividly presented to you, but it's not very well integrated with the rest of your knowledge, and so that's a kind of unclarity too. So it's not unclear because it's not vivid. It is vivid. It's unclear because it's disconnected from everything. It's almost like there's these two forms of unclarity. There's unclarity as a lack of vividness or lack of presentation, and unclarity as a lack of integration. And a difficulty in expressing a thought could actually be due to one or the other of these types of unclarity. And actually, so I have a new book project that on the nature of clarity, where I talk about these two dimensions. And I think that there's various ways in which a thought could be unclear, and I just mentioned two of them. But I do think that clarity is there's a singular quality of clarity. So there's Tolstoy. What is it? He said that all happy families were happy in the same way, but unhappy ones are unhappy in different ways. Probably false about families, but in the case of clarity, I think it is true. There's one way in which thoughts and formulations, pieces of language could be clear, but many different ways of falling short of clarity. And so this is the topic that I'm sort of dealing with now, but also just as a way, just even simpler answer to your question. One thing that I want to emphasize is that there's a difference between unclarity, and lack of determinacy. So you can have a thought that's perfectly determinate, but unclear. So oftentimes you can think about something very, very specific, but still the thought could be unclear. Or you can have a pretty vague thought that will be perfectly clear. And so the fact that a thought is unclear to someone itself doesn't mean that there's nothing on the person's mind. There could be something very, very important that's worth making clear. In fact, the relationship between determinacy and clarity is kind of like the relationship between size and visibility. They're not the same property, but there's an interesting connection, right? If something is small, it tends to be difficult to see. But anyway, so that's the direction that I'm now trying to go with in a lot of my research.
Great. So uh, I will be leaving a link in the description box to your book, which is again articulating a thought. And where can people find you and your work on the internet?
I mean, so on my website, through Temple, uh, they can find it. I think my book is available on all the regular venues and stuff.
Okay. Do you already have any idea when your next book will be published?
I don't know when it's going to be published. I'm still kind of uh, in the thick of writing it.
Okay, great. So anyway, when it's published, I would really love to have you back on the show. And but for now, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, and it's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been fun.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you like what I'm doing and to keep the channel sustainable, please consider supporting me on Patreon or PayPal. All of the links are in the description box of this interview. Otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, Learning and Development Done Differently. Check the website at enlights.com. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters, Karen Litska and Blanchett Perga Larson, Lau Guerrero, Francis Ford, Hans Frederick Sunder, Ricardo Vladimiro, Craig Healy, Adam Castle, Olaf Alex, Jonathan Wiesel, Jacob Klinkby, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Ian Ricalania, John Connors, Paulina Barron, Philip Force Connolly, Jerry Mueller, Herbert Gintis, Rutger Voss, Wo Weingard, Rebecca Newberger, Goldstein, Dan Demetri, Robert Windiger, Rui Narcio, Arthur Coe, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Susan Pinker, Bernardo Seixas, Pablo Santurbano, Simon Columbus, Jorge Espinha, Phil Kavanagh, Corey Clark, Mark Blythe, Roberto Enguanzo, Michael Stormir, Eric Neumann, Samuel Andreev, Tiago Nunes, Bernardini, Alexander Dunbauer, Fergal Cusson, Ivan Bodrenko, Paula Herzog, Don Ross, Jonathan Librant, Haslem Bullet, Nathan Nguyen, Stanton T, Samuel Correa, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, J.W. João Eira, Tom Hummel, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Deja Araújo, Romain Roach, Dmitry Grigoriev, Diego Londonho Correa, Tom Roth, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavel Ostazewski, Nelek Bach, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, Al Ortiz, Guy Madison, Gary G. Hellman, João Linhares, Lida Cosmides, Saima Afzal, Adrian Yeagy, Nick Golden, Paulo Tolentino, João Barbosa, Jules Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Pons Cortez, Ursula Litzke, Dennis Cook, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Todd Shackelford, Sunny Smith, and John Wiseman. My producers Cesar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Luís Caetano, Tom Wagner, Dan Curtis Dixon, João Linhares, Benedict Mueller, Vega Guidi, Sardus Francis, Thomas Trumbull, and Nuno Welder, and my executive producers Michel Rugieski, Rosie, James Pratt, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, and Bogdan Kanivets. Thank you for all.